Everyone, and welcome to today's session. My name's Laura Mondon. I'm one of the trainers here at the Institute Community Directors Australia, and it's my pleasure to present this session to you on running effective meetings. I'd like to start today's session by inviting you to join me in acknowledging the First Peoples and their connection to country. In Australia, this connection has been maintained for more than 60,000 years, exists today and extends into the future. Together we acknowledge the elders and ancestors of country on which we meet and live and work, and pay our respects to elders past and present, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. This session this evening, Running Effective Meetings, is the second of 5 one-hour sessions on various topics that we're running to help support you in your role as a committee member. The session is being recorded, so you will be able to watch it and share it with your fellow committee members and in the community. At a later stage, you'll be getting a copy of the recording. There is also some downloads that are available, the PowerPoint itself that I'll be speaking to this evening, as well as a couple of template tools that I'll refer to during the session. So I invite you again to share those around. We'd like to share the resources, and that's the work that we're passionate about here at ICTA. So the more that you can share that around, the better. I'd also like to thank Nicole and Mitch from Smart Transformation. They have made this session possible this evening. Okay, let's get into it. So just a couple of tech things. I'd like to introduce Grace, who'll be around to help today if we have any technical difficulties. The control panel is on the right-hand corner of your screen. While you can't speak to me directly this evening during the session, you can ask questions by clicking on the chat box. And I'll answer those as we go. If there's any questions I don't know the answer to, I will take those on notice and follow them up tomorrow. So you can do this at any time. We encourage you to participate as much as you like. Again, remember you can download the presentation, so you don't need to take notes during the session. Okay. Just a little bit of info there. If you're having any issues with your audio, please do yell out in the chat and I will assist you. Hopefully everyone's figured it all out. Wonderful. There's another one there just in case you need it. All right. What we're going to cover in the session this evening is that we believe that better meetings mean better governance for your organisation. So all of you, people who are involved in the organisation, make an enormous contribution to your communities. As committee members, you bring your experience, your expertise, your commitment to the committee and across the Dysart community, and you're doing wonderful things for your community through these roles. Meetings, we know, take time, so we want them to be purposeful and effective. So they provide the space for you and your committee members to come together, but they also, we know from the work we do here, can sometimes use some support around how to make them more effective. So we are going to talk a little bit about the legal context, ingredients of good meetings, the role of various people, the chairperson, the deputy chairperson, the treasurer, secretary, and general committee members. And we're also going to talk about the process of making decisions and some resources as well at the end. Okay, so why do we have meetings? I think it seems fairly straightforward, but sometimes we forget. Of course, the answer is to make decisions. If anyone's in agreement with me there, I think you can put that in the chat as well. It's obviously there's some social elements of being on a committee or a board, but that is not the purpose of the meeting. It's not a social chat. It's not an opportunity to go around in circles and discuss the same thing all the time. You're really there sort of to get down to business and make decisions about what your organisation is going to do. As a committee member, it's your role to set the direction of the organisation. So one of your most important governance functions is to be part of those effective meetings and to participate in those meetings and make decisions during those meetings. Now, I spoke a bit about legal duties in a previous session, which you can also download. You've received a copy of it, hopefully, as well. You can watch that at your leisure if you missed it last week. But the legal duties I will go over just briefly. Again, duty to act bona fide in the interests of your organisation. So that's in the best interests of your organisation. You have a duty to exercise your powers for a proper purpose, a duty to retain discretion. You have a duty to avoid conflicts of interest, including improper use of your position on the committee, any use of confidential information that you'll have access to, and the related party transactions. You also have duty of care, skill, and diligence. So you need to take care when you're undertaking your responsibilities as a committee member, and you also have a duty to prevent insolvent trading. Now, ingredients of good meetings. So like any good recipe, the things that go into it are going to lead to a better baked cake, if we're going to use that analogy of the ingredients this evening. So essentially, we need to have particular things in place to make sure that the meetings that we are running and attending and participating are effective vehicle for making decisions, which is the main reason you're meeting. So including understanding your core governance role and your functions, what we do, and that shared culture and approach, which is the way you do it. So your core governance functions, so what exactly are they? As part of your important governance role, you'll be overseeing and making decisions about planning, about the finances, about the strategic management of the organisation, as well as creating a positive culture around respect and achievement that responds to the changing needs of your community and your organisation. So here we're talking about carrying out the objects of being an effective board member rests on encouraging a culture of respect, compliance, and achievement, forward-looking and imaginative planning, protecting your financial supervision, efficient and effective management, knowing what's important, and being prompt in your decision-making. So in meetings, we've talked about the main purpose being making decisions, but there's also other things that happen in meetings as well. So I'm sure you're familiar with the things that we've got listed on the slide, but plans are reviewed, different perspectives have a chance to be heard, information flows are tracked, decisions are made, we've already covered that, decisions are recorded, that's really important, something I'm going to emphasise quite a lot this evening. Decision makers are held accountable, and you're accountable to your members, you're accountable to your clients, you're accountable to people who use your organisation's services. Okay, so we've broadly discussed your governance functions, that is what you do, and now we're going to talk about the way you do it. So meetings work best when there is an effective culture of respect, compliance and achievement, and we're not going to all agree, we know that, not everyone's going to share the same views at all times, but we do need to respect each other's right to have those views in order to work together to make good decisions as a group. As leaders of your organisation, it's your responsibility to set that culture. So that's setting it from the top, and we do believe that to be the case in any organisation. So the leadership is setting the tone. So this includes setting an example and enforcing standards. It also means developing a culture of open and courteous communication, so respectful communication, reducing the impact of potential disputes and dealing with issues quickly, not allowing them to kind of fester and go unresolved for many months. And a valuable tool with setting your culture is a code of conduct, which sets a real clear set of behaviour expectations and parameters, and also possibly some consequences if code of conduct is not followed. Also, a culture of questioning should be fostered in your organisation. So you really want committees to be asking questions. If they don't understand something about the financial reports or about anything really, they should be really encouraged to ask questions, because as a committee member, you want to make informed decisions so you're not just going with the flow. The link on the screen here, I don't think I've put that on there. I think it's on the next slide. Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the specific roles in meetings. So you'll be aware of most of the ones we've got listed. And as I mentioned in the session last week, there might be different language that you use for the chairperson. That might be a president in your committee and a vice president instead of a deputy chairperson. Secretary is often fairly interchangeable, the treasurer and committee members. So it might mean board members or trustees or whatever language and term that you use. So I'm going to use committee member, and I'm going to use chairperson and deputy chairperson. So you just need to interchange those as is appropriate for your organisation. So every committee must have a chairperson, and they might also have a deputy chairperson. And this will depend on whether your constitution requires you to have one. Even if you're not required to have one, you might still choose to have one, because having a deputy chairperson does mean that there's somebody to stand in if your chairperson is unavailable, is unwell, or for whatever reason. In addition to the chairperson and the deputy, you'll also have a secretary, a treasurer, and a number of general or ordinary committee members, whatever term is used in your constitution. So essentially that means that they're committee members that don't have a specific role of the ones listed there. So these are some of the general roles of the people who attend your committee meetings. We also need a common understanding about how we run the meetings. And so that little block down the bottom there in red is what we call standing orders. Now, standing orders is a bit of a jargon term that we use, but essentially we mean meeting rules. So how you're going to conduct your meetings, and having a set of standing orders can be really valuable in giving structure to your meetings, but also in giving a real clear guidance to committee members on conduct, on some areas that perhaps sometimes can lead to conflict. Is when you have a document that you can go to and say, this is how we do it and this is how things are done. It's really clear and makes, makes it easier to keep people on track and help people have that kind of confidence that it isn't personal, that it really is about the standing orders or the process. So we'll talk a little bit about them in one of the later slides. Now, the chairperson. So again, this could be a president in your case, but we're going to use the term chairperson for the purpose of this presentation. So essentially, your chairperson is a first among equals. They're a facilitator, they're an active listener, and they're a negotiator. A chairperson always keeps an eye on the governance context, the objects and purpose of the organisation. They have that at front of mind at all times. They are familiar with and are confident that they know the legal duties of committee members and the strategic plan, and they're using those documents to, I guess, guide their decision making, as should all the other committee members. The chairperson leads by example. They turn up to meetings on time. They conduct themselves in line with the code of conduct in terms of their behaviour, and they also look at, how they are influencing the rest of the group in terms of their conduct. They're conscious of that all the time. Now, the chairperson is fully informed and they inform fully. They don't have to know everything about everything, but they do have to have knowledge about what's happening in the organisation and be confident they know that that is linked to the purpose and activities in order to skillfully lead discussions. So they're going to have that, again, in the back of their mind when they're undertaking their duties as the chairperson. They have the respect and trust of their fellow committee members and the staff at the organisation, if your organisation has staff, and they set a strong moral and ethical tone. So again, they're abiding by and upholding that code of conduct. They can also keep confidence and can see past personal opinions and ensure fair discussion of issues. That's a skill that a chairperson should have. And they also ensure that everyone is aware of and abides by the organisation's policies, including that conflict of interest policy and also the code of conduct. The chairperson is also a consensus builder. They aim to bring people together, and while having the courage to sometimes draw people out who might be a little bit more quiet in the meetings, they might encourage those people to speak up and be heard. And they'll also work with some of those more confident speakers who like to talk all the time to maybe rein it in a little bit and pare it back to give other people an opportunity to speak. They also achieve results by knowing when to exercise patience and when to push through change. And that's a really tricky one, but a really important one for a treasurer to have. And there might be instances in your constitution, depending on what it says, where your chairperson might have a secondary vote where there is a tie at a committee meeting. So if there is a vote on a particular issue and it is tied 3-3, the chairperson will have, in some circumstances, a secondary vote that they will exercise to then go one way or the other. But that's something just worth noting. Again, your deputy chairperson may not be a requirement in your constitution, but is often, even if it isn't a requirement, a good thing to have in place. A deputy chairperson can be, again, as I said earlier, that person that steps in for the chairperson when they're not available or they're unwell or for whatever reason. It can also sometimes be a role that someone might undertake before they become a chairperson. So they might be doing as a bit of a chairperson in training and get some mentoring by the existing chairperson. So that can be a bit of a succession planning tool as well that can be valuable in your strategic and long-term planning and succession planning for your board or your committee. They also support and assist the chairperson in their functions, and it's something, I guess, that they step in, as I mentioned earlier, they step in when the chairperson is unavailable and they actually chair the meetings. I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of the secretary. And the role can vary, but there's what we're going to talk about today is, I guess, some of the core functions of a secretary in most community organisations. So they're the person that makes the arrangements for the meetings, keeps formal records of board and committee processes and decisions. So they're taking the minutes. I'm going to talk a little bit later about the decision register, but they'd be the person that will be putting that information in there as well. And I guess in terms of the qualities of a good secretary, you're looking at somebody who's calm, they're efficient, they have good attention to detail, and sometimes the secretary shoulders a pretty large burden because they've got a lot of responsibilities and, like the correspondence, like taking minutes and that sort of thing. So I think it's really important that some of that is actually shared around as well. For example, do they have to be at every single event? Do they might have the responsibility for maintaining policies, but do they actually need to be the person that writes all the policies? Well, no, you can have a subcommittee that works on that. And do they have to have do they have to take every set of minutes? There could be a possibility of sharing that role. The secretary, yes, will be in charge of ensuring that is that they are actually done, but they will not necessarily have to be the person who writes all the minutes. Okay. Now we're moving on to the treasurer. So we did talk earlier about the fact that the chairperson is the first among equals. Well, the treasurer is the first among financial equals. So while the treasurer will have particular responsibilities, I'm going to emphasise a number of times that the treasurer is not the only person in the organisation with financial responsibilities. They might have more expertise than the rest of the committee, but they don't burden the responsibility of all the financial decisions. So what the treasurer should be doing is writing reports on the current financial situation and performance of the organisation. This will include maintaining financial reports, accounts, writing the budget, and contributing to business planning. The treasurer's report should be a standing item at every single committee meeting because it's something that every committee member needs to know about all the time. So it's not something that you should be doing at budget time or once every few meetings. It really does need to be discussed, and the reports should be provided at every meeting. The treasurer also needs to be able to communicate in plain English what is in the financial report. So it's again, when I talked earlier about the culture of questioning. It's really giving people the opportunity to ask questions about the reports if they don't understand, but also providing the information and a sufficient amount of information, but not overloading people with jargon or things that are difficult for them to read in terms of the report. So that might mean that the treasurer does actually explain the report at the meetings, some elements of the report so that people understand what the position is. But it might also mean the treasurer might have to work with individual committee members who don't have as much financial acumen and confidence to make sure that they do understand the reports. So again, as we were mentioning earlier, we really want everyone to be informed when they're making decisions. And of course, we need to know the financial position of the organisation to do that. So every meeting, the Treasurer is producing and providing the regular reports. Once a year, the Treasurer is providing a draft budget, which is approved by the board. So the Treasurer is making a recommendation to the board or committee about what they believe should be in the budget, but they're not making the final call. In the end, it is the whole committee who makes that ultimate decision. Now, so we've talked about the specific roles of the chairperson, the deputy chairperson, the treasurer. So this is everybody. So all committee members have these responsibilities. So the roles we've just mentioned, as well as everybody else. So that's all your ordinary or general committee members have these responsibilities. So they should be, regardless of their role, participating in all aspects of the meeting. It is expected that committee members have already read the papers, so they turn up to meetings prepared. So they've read, there's a policy being reviewed, they've read it, they might have taken their own notes. They might have even asked questions prior to that meeting so that they understand when they're coming to the meeting, they're actually at the decision stage rather than asking lots of questions at the meeting, but they're coming informed essentially to get down to business. Committee members should stick to the agenda. So again, that's the role of the treasurer to kind of help guide people and set the tone, but other committee members also have responsibility to help the chairperson in their role in keeping the agenda on track. A good committee member does not hang back when they should be speaking up. So again, if they've got questions, they should ask those questions. If something doesn't feel quite right, they should be asking for more information. And when they can provide advice and support, they should be doing that, particularly if they've got that expertise. Again, a committee member, going back to code of conduct, they don't get personal. This is about making the best decisions in the interests of the organisation, and they should be respecting their fellow committee members at all times and abiding by that code of conduct. So, key elements of good decision making and some meeting tools. We're going to talk about that in the next section here. So we've talked about the different roles on the committee, and now we're going to talk about how a committee can make decisions. So we're going to look at the general approach to decision making, including what should happen in meetings, how we use those standing orders that I mentioned in an earlier slide, and how that can help support the processes within the meetings. And we're also going to look at what you should do before meetings, during the meetings, and afterwards as a follow-up. So general approach to decision making. Here on the slide you can see there are some basics of well-run meetings. The basics of a good run meeting, I think we can all agree, is when participants understand their roles and responsibilities, generally understand the approach, so everyone's coming prepared. There is an agenda that's keeping everybody on track and making the meeting purposeful. All participants contribute to the meeting. Decisions are made and accepted by all, and action items are agreed upon. So these are some of the key elements of a well-run meeting. And this can work until conflict emerges. So it is really important that there's a set of agreements that supports a culture where there is a true spirit of cooperation and collaboration, as this will ultimately benefit the whole organisation. So standing orders is something I mentioned earlier, and essentially, like I said, it's a set of rules that tells you how you're going to run your meetings. Having standing orders means you don't end up arguing about whether or not you can do this or do that in a particular meeting. An example that we've seen here is that two board members, come together. The committee's having a meeting, the board's having a meeting, and then two of those board members are arguing about how many amendments can be made to a motion before it needs to be held off to the next meeting. And taking up half the meeting with such a discussion would be very frustrating for all concerned. And as we mentioned earlier, many times it is important that the meetings are purposeful. Your time is valuable. You're a committee member. You're volunteering. You have other family responsibilities and work and other commitments. So you really want to make sure that your meetings are purposeful. So standing orders can help some of these challenges, I suppose, from becoming an issue. So the frequency of your meetings will depend on what's in your constitution. I've mentioned that document a couple of times, and I did talk about it in a little bit more detail in the first session. But a couple of things I will talk about is the quorum is the number of people that need to be present for you to make decisions. So that is actually stipulated in your constitution and might vary depending on the organisation, because the details are, like I said, in that constitution, which might be different for each committee you're on if you're on multiple committees. So it's worth checking each time. Where an issue requires action or where a contract or agreement has to be entered into, the matter must be agreed upon by the whole committee. A resolution is approved in majority or in favour. So if it's there's a discussion, for example, when the AGM should be held and a few dates are floating around, finally the chairperson says, okay, I think we're kind of in agreement on the 31st of October. Can people have a vote, put a motion forward, and they do that. So your standing orders will go into detail about how that might happen at your organisation. So just a quick note about circular resolutions. So that's when voting is done by the circulation of papers or via email, and all committee members are invited to participate that. So it's not just people who can't attend the meeting, that's everybody in the committee. And a resolution is approved in writing by a majority of those members. The committee must then check that that's minuted at the next meeting. So it can happen. And I guess looking at the times that we've been living in the last 2 years, it's probably been more common. People are out for a couple of weeks and can't attend a meeting but want to participate, and circular resolutions can be a way of them doing that. So sorry, just before I click to the next slide, there's 2 links on there that you'll see. One is to the Community Director's Standing Orders sample that you can have a look at. That's the organisation I work for. There's also Rules Online, which is a very, I guess, full version of standing orders that you might want to use, and both of those documents are very useful. Okay, a note about conflicts of interest. A conflict of interest arises when your private interests come into conflict with your duty to act in the best interests of your organisation. However, through good governance, these conflicts can be identified, resolved, or even prevented. There are 2 types of conflicts of interest. There's pecuniary interests, which refer to financial gains or losses, and there's non-pecuniary interests, which refer to benefits gained due to personal or family relationships. So, for example, recommending a family member for a job or a contract. And so they're the 2 types. You also need to know the difference between an actual conflict, a potential conflict, and a perceived conflict. So you've got the 3 colours on the slide there in the circle with the arrows. An actual conflict of interest is when your private influences do influence your role as a committee member. Sorry, your private interests, rather, influence your role as a committee member. Perceived conflict of interest is when it appears that your private interests influence your role as a committee member. Potential conflict of interest is when your private interests might possibly influence your role as a committee member in the future. So there's 3 different types there to be across. If a committee member has an actual conflict of interest, they should report that to the committee, and they shouldn't be involved in any decisions made around that particular matter. The way to deal with this during a meeting in terms of process is that committee member will actually leave the meeting when that matter is discussed. If, for example, a contract is being hired and there's a family member that might potentially get that contract, then that particular committee member would actually be stepping out of the room. The minutes will actually note that the individual has left the room, and the minutes will note when they return to the meeting. So that's really clear that Laura was not in the meeting for that particular part when that issue was discussed. The committee should consider putting in a conflict of interest policy so that these processes can be made clear. Okay, so we've discussed the general approach to decision making, including what should happen, how the standing orders can support the structure and process of decision making and the running of your meetings, and we've also discussed the importance of declaring conflicts of interest. Next, we're going to look at what should happen before your meetings, during the meetings, and afterwards. So before meetings is about preparation. So you're getting ready for the meetings. Everyone should have a copy of the agenda. They should have a copy of the draft minutes from the meeting and any related papers so that they come into the next meeting with an understanding of what happened before, what's intended to be discussed at the meeting, and any related documents. Now, we do have a template that you can actually download from the control panel. There's an attachment there for an agenda, minutes, and a decision-making tool, which I will talk about in a moment. Okay, so the secretary or the chairperson sends out the papers for the committee to carry out the next meeting. So that will be the agenda, as I mentioned, the draft minutes, and any papers that contain background information that they need to be aware of. Often there'll be motions in there that people want to vote for if that information is known in advance of the meeting. So just there on the slide, you can see that's a copy of the example template that we have that you'll have access to. As you can see, so you've got some information. So I'm just going to look to the right here for a second. We've got the item that's going to be discussed. You can also fill in as you go any motions that have already been decided are going to be discussed around that particular item, and some formalities there. You know, welcoming people, apologies is people who have advised that they're not attending the meeting, declaring any conflicts of interest, and the confirmation of the minutes. And that's just a little bit more of the document there. A couple more of the sort of standard agenda items, but what you have on your agenda really does depend on what is suitable for your organisation. Now, at the bottom there's the link in case you don't download the attachment there, but you can do that from there as well. Okay, so we've talked about preparation. So before the meetings, you're getting your agenda, your draft minutes, any relevant papers, so you're coming prepared. During the meeting, these are some of the basics that you'll want to have in place so that people, again, can get down to the business of making decisions. So you're ensuring quorum. I've mentioned what that is. That will depend on what your constitution says, so you need to highlight that in red pen or highlighter so we know every time how many people need to be present. You're declaring any conflicts of interest so that that's really clear, it's minuted, and everybody understands clearly what's happening. The committee members also need to move through the agenda. So you're going through each of those items that you've been pre-warned and hopefully pre-prepared to discuss. Proposed motions. So if there are going to be specific big decisions that you don't have to have a motion for every single decision that you're making. Decisions should definitely be in the minutes. They should be in the decision register. Whether you make that a formal motion that is made and seconded is up to you, and could also depend on what you decide to put in your meeting rules or your standing orders. So you're making decisions. That's the main bit of the meeting. You're recording these in those two forms. So again, in the minutes and in the decision register. And that decision register can be a really simple document. So I talked about the decision-making tool, which you can download from our website and from the control panel. But the decision register is really a very basic document, which I think I've got an example of here. I do. Where you really are just recording the date and the decisions. So this isn't a replacement for the minutes. They still need to be done every meeting, but this is a document that's going to have essentially all the dates and all the decisions that you've made, possibly since the beginning of your organisation, if you want to go that far back. But once you start the process, you'll keep adding to that at every meeting. And it's a really useful tool, and I'll talk about it when I get to this slide, but I want you to see that copy just there. Okay. So motions are basically the proposal that you're going to vote on, which is formulated into a sentence. I move that we have the annual general meeting on the 13th of October. So these are best circulated in advance if you know them. They must be seconded by another member or not. Up to you. Again, checking what your standing orders say or what you'd like to put in your standing orders. They can be moved at the meeting. They can be amended. They must be in writing. They must be in the minutes. So it must be recorded what your motions are, and it should be clear about what it is who's going to do it, and when they're going to do it. Formal motions do not need to be passed, like I said, about every single decision, but it does help to have some formality around big decisions. Again, the AGM might seem like a small thing, but it also might be a big decision. It might be a big change for the organisation. Maybe you always had it on the first week of October and you change it to the second. So those big decisions should probably be made into a motion. Now, the Secretary is responsible for overseeing the minutes. I mentioned this when I talked about the role of the Secretary. The Secretary should read the minutes carefully and to ensure that they're accurate. They don't have to include everything that's discussed. The minutes should really be essentially recording the decisions and a very general discussion about each of the agenda items. The minutes must also show the committee that they have considered all reasonable options when making the decision. They must include any of the motions, as I mentioned earlier. They don't have to include the names unless people want to have that in. If somebody really wanted their name next to a particular motion, then you would put their name. The minutes must be and should be, as a good formality, signed by the chair. They don't become fact until they're approved. So that's why in the agenda you would have a standing item of approving the minutes from the previous meeting. And so that should be standard practice. So until that process has happened to the next meeting, the minutes are in draft form. Recording decisions. So I've talked a lot about the purpose of the meetings. The primary goal of your committee meetings to make them purposeful is to make decisions. So it's essential that your decisions are recorded for accountability, for historical reasons, but also so you know what you've agreed upon as a committee and what you've decided to do and when. So minutes can be, decisions should be recorded in the minutes and also in the decision register, which I have shown you earlier, but you're seeing it again here. So really simple example on the screen there. You've got the date being the 4th of the 5th, 2022. The decision was made that the 2022 AGM will be held on Friday, the 21st of October, 2022. I've put quite a few different October dates in there just to confuse us, but essentially, we really want it to be a very simple document. It's a simple table. You possibly will print it out, bring it to the meeting or have it available on the laptop so that when someone says, did we make a decision about that thing we're still talking about? Actually, yes, we did. 12 months ago, we decided that we weren't going to do that or that we were going to do this particular thing. Really useful induction tool as well. I've recently joined a new board and it's really having a document like this. Unfortunately, I don't have one, but would have been really valuable so that I can understand what's happened in the last 6 months without having to go through every single copy of the minutes. So we've talked a bit about what is in the minutes, but taking the minutes is not like dictation. So you're not taking down every word that every single person who was in the meeting said, but you are having a bit of an overview. So you want to know what matters, you want to know that what the matters were that were discussed, you want to know who was there, so you're taking attendance and apologies if there are any, and you also, of course, mainly want to know what the decisions were in the end so that everyone's clear about what's been decided. You will have to record any point where someone declares a conflict, as I mentioned earlier, so when they've left the room, when the matter that they had the conflict in is discussed, and when they return, and you also would record if somebody called for a quorum. Now, a template that we've got up on the screen, I've also got the link there for you as well, is on template minutes. You don't have to use this. You could modify it, have a modified version of this document, but this is a really simple table format. A great reason to have this particular format like this or something similar is you can actually get the secretary to type straight into it. So they put the agenda items, plug them straight in and type them as the meeting is happening, rather than having to take pages and pages of handwritten notes and then have to follow up and do them down the track. Then becomes, I guess, a burden for the secretary and could possibly cause delays in them coming to the rest of the committee. So just something to think about, using a template like this or something similar that works for your organisation. As I mentioned, the link is there, but you can also download a copy from the control panel. So we've talked about what happens before meetings in terms of the preparation. We've also talked about what happens in the meetings. We've talked about motions and decisions. So what happens after the meetings? So after the meetings, the Secretary should be distributing a copy of the minutes in draft form to all committee members so that they can check that and they can ask for clarification. They can alert the Secretary to any errors or incorrect dates or inaccuracies. It's really important that everybody reads the copy because I guess that's their opportunity to make those corrections. And also, of course, at the next meeting, those minutes will then be confirmed as a true and accurate record of the previous meeting. Now, we talked about the decision register. So they're going to plug all those sort of main decisions into the decision register as well as a secondary tool. So this is just a bit of a diagram that talks about the process that I guess summarises the process that I've talked about. So again, I'm just going to look to my screen on the right here, before the meeting, you've got a decision-making tool which is going to help you make decisions. That's prior to the meeting, so you're turning up informed. Any reports or quotes if there's any procurement or there's any building happening or renovations or contracting, you'd have that information sent before the meeting, and of course the agenda. During the meeting, you've got things that are listed for decision, for discussion, and for information. And after the meeting is where you're getting a copy of the draft minutes. You're getting any actions, of course, that are in the minutes themselves, and you've also got the decision register. Now, in this next session, just conscious of time, we're going to briefly talk about how to make meeting processes more inclusive, and we'll touch a little bit on the importance of diversity on your committee and how that leads to better outcomes, the importance of emotions in decision making, and we'll also share with you a decision making roadmap for some more complex issues. So diversity is important, we know that, and we're not just talking about the diversity that we can see, we're talking about diversity of opinion, diversity of ideas, the way we see things, the way we want things to happen. We all think differently, we all have different life histories that we bring to, and different experience that we bring to our committee role, and that's really important, and it's a wonderful thing. And it's something that we should celebrate and acknowledge. And committees make their best decisions when all ideas and feelings have been genuinely heard and different perspectives have been explored. Pardon me. Excuse me. And all participants have been welcomed, pulled together their excuse me. And ideas have been synthesised. It should be focused on positive, inclusive, open and collaborative culture. We've talked a number of times this evening about the importance of the board setting the tone, using that code of conduct to make sure that people are conducting themselves in a particular way. Being positive, inclusive and open is important, of course. And it's the chairperson's role is to foster that. So everyone's participating in setting that tone, and the chairperson is taking that leadership role. But divergent approaches should be encouraged. Lateral thinking and different perspectives help board members committee members and board members make better decisions. Now, the importance of compromise and acceptance. The committee should make decisions that everyone is willing to accept and live with. That's really important. It's a fine balance to encourage that robust discussion. There are some issues that you as a committee member will deal with that will challenge you personally and challenge your values and your ideas. But again, if we go back to those legal duties, you have an obligation to act in the best interest of the organisation. So while you might have particular views, you have to make sure that those aren't unduly influencing your ability to make decisions that are for the best for that organisation, not you as an individual. But in terms of making decisions, it's really important that decisions are explored but that everybody can live with and accept those decisions, even if they're not happy with them. We talk about this term committee or board solidarity here at ICTA quite a bit. And board members and committee members might have decisions that maybe they themselves actually voted no on. But if you are to remain on that board, you actually have to speak with one voice. You can have that robust discussion, which is really important. But once a motion has been put to vote, or a decision has been put to vote, and if it was voted up and you didn't agree with it, you still have to support it publicly. And you can't, go outside of the committee kind of silence and talk to other people about the fact you didn't vote for it. You really do have to have that solidarity and support the board and support the committee that you are on. An effective chair as well should supported by the rest of the committee, should also attempt to create inclusive culture where different opinions are encouraged. So we really do want to hear from people, even if we disagree with them. While it would make it very easy if everybody agreed, we know that that wouldn't make for very good decision making and wouldn't make for good outcomes for your organisation. And if this approach is adopted where everyone's included and having an opportunity to be heard, we know committee members will be more willing to compromise and ultimately accept the decision. People often want that opportunity to have that robust discussion that I've mentioned a couple of times, and they want to be able to have their opinion heard, and they are often able to move on even if that is not the decision the committee decides to make. But if you don't give people that opportunity, they often harbour resentment, and it can lead to conflict as well. The win-win approach. So how do we achieve the win-win approach? It sounds idealistic, but it is very possible. You might have heard of it. Essentially, it means compromise. It doesn't lead to one person losing and one person winning, but actually both parties winning something. Everyone might not get everything that they want, but the idea is everybody gets some of what they want. So that's why we get that win-win compromise. In order to do this, you need to focus on people's underlying needs, not just what they say initially, but their deeper concerns. So try to get to the heart of what the issue might be if someone's disagreeing with somebody else. Recognise the fact that people do have different values, and we all have something positive to contribute from our own positions and perspectives. Be open and willing to adapt your position. So if a committee member disagrees with you, and you do, after a while, you hear different perspectives, you change your position, be open to changing your position. So don't be, stuck because you're wanting a particular way forward. If you can see a compromised way forward, I encourage you to seek that out. And address the problem at hand. So don't get sidetracked by side issues, factions, or personality clashes, or long histories. We do know that this can happen, and conflict is really challenging to deal with sometimes. But we believe with good processes in place, well-run meetings, and fair and equitable decision-making and opportunities for discussion, that conflict can be avoided and you can have a win-win. Now, longer-term solutions for better committees and better meetings and better governance means that you have an effective orientation program. So this includes inducting all your new board members and having something in place that is ready to go. So one of the things that I think is very common is that a committee member leaves and they might have been there for some time, and there's not necessarily the handover that would be ideal from one committee member leaving to the next person that's starting. So having that information available at hand, like that decision register, like a folder containing the policies, the code of conduct, the constitution, some of those key governance tools will be really useful to have on hand when you have a change in committee member. Putting in place a review system to allow for regular assessment. There's some great online tools that you can use to self-assess your committee to see whether you do need training or you do need some additional support, or whether you are doing an amazing job and you don't need to change any of your practices. Ensure those that are elected to the positions of chair and deputy chair are aware of their leadership role. We've talked a little bit about in this session, as well as the previous one, about the importance of their leadership role and setting that tone for the whole committee. So it's really important that the right people are in those positions and that they take that responsibility seriously. Give committee members an opportunity to interact informally. So have some nice social things as well that can help, I guess, keep people not just down to business all the time, but have some social opportunities to interact outside of the committee room, the boardroom. And that gives people an opportunity to get to know each other and build relationships as well. Review your meeting procedures periodically. So have you got an agenda template? Have you got some standing orders? Do you need to review your standing orders? Are they causing conflict or potential problems in the meeting processes? So have a look at those periodically and put in a process to allow committee members to provide regular feedback. So they can do that anonymously, is always handy, but also encourage people to be brave and actually say what they think. If there are things that they're not comfortable with, we have encouraged culture of questioning. We're talking about that. I've mentioned that a couple of times this evening, but also people should be comfortable enough to say, I don't think that's right, and I don't agree that we should do it that way. Let's talk about it. It's not personal. It's about improving the organisation. It's about improving the experience that you have as committee members and board members, so everybody benefits and the organisation certainly benefits. And we've got a link just there on, there's the Victorian Council of Social Service has a governance health check that you may want to undertake. It's asked a series of questions about your role as a committee member and also some useful resources as well. Now we're nearly at time. I've got a few more slides to go. Thank you so much for bearing with me and listening to the information very intently. I hope you're finding it valuable. Okay, so this is the committee looks at itself. So this is that self-review that we're talking about. We'll just go into a little bit more detail about this. So the committee once a year should be having that perhaps do a self-assessment tool like the one I mentioned that VCOS has, but also holding a review and asking questions of themselves. Has the committee got the right mix of skills? Do they need more training? Is the committee listening to its stakeholders? What's your engagement plan like? Well, are you engaging regularly with your stakeholders, with your clients, with people in your community, with government agencies or whoever it is your organisation has to deal with? Is the committee operating smoothly? Are your meetings well run? Are they going for hours and hours and hours without resolution on a number of issues? Are they reasonable in their structure and time frame commitments that you're asking of people? Is the committee accountable and transparent? Do you have policies in place? Are you utilising them? Do you look at them? Do you ever review them? Is the committee asking the big questions? So that self-reflection and looking at, are we acting in the best interest of our organisation? Are we still sticking to our vision and our mission, or are we actually getting off track? Also, is the committee forwarding the objects and the purpose of the organisation? I've mentioned that already. It's really important that that still is your driver at all times. It influences how you write your policies. It should be influencing what grants you apply for and how you undertake all your business. And just in the last couple of minutes, I'd just like to say another big thank you to Nicole and Mitch from Smart Transformation for making this session possible. We would be delighted if you could attend the other upcoming sessions that we have in the next few weeks. The dates are there on the screen. So attracting and retaining volunteering is the next one coming up. There's also one on budgeting and social media. And my colleague John will be coming up to Dysart on the 11th of June to hopefully meet you all face-to-face in real life, or IRL as we say now. It's wonderful to be able to provide these sessions online like this, but I know John will also be really relishing the opportunity to meet you face-to-face and provide you with some additional support to supplement the sessions that I'm running online. I highly encourage you to come along. I thank you for your attendance this evening. I've got some more resources there that you can download at your leisure with some information that hopefully you'll find useful in your role as a committee member, and just a whole page of them there just in case the other one wasn't enough. Again, those templates that I've mentioned through the session this evening, the agenda, the minutes, that decision-making tool, are all there for you to download. Thank you again so much. If you've got any final questions and would like to put those in the chat, I'd be delighted to answer those for you. But as always, we invite your feedback. You will be getting a link to a survey that we would really encourage and appreciate you filling in. We're always learning here at ICTA how to better prepare these sessions and also how to better support you in your role as a committee member. Again, thank you. I don't think I have any questions. I'll just have a quick check. We don't. Just a very big thank you again, and thank you on behalf of your communities and those that use your services for the valuable role that you do. Thank you. Bye.
That's great, Laura. Thanks very much.